I want to share a few words with you of the great Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. In this beloved book of mine, I should say of his, called The Strength to Love, a compilation of his sermons that he gave and then begrudgingly wrote them down because there is nothing like hearing MLK speak himself. And so this is a sermon called Shattered Dreams that I think speaks to our time. So much of what he said continues, perhaps unfortunately, to resonate so much with our times. And yet he speaks of the human condition. And so, of course, it resonates. Every MLK weekend, I like to bring his words to us. And different words, he had so much to say. So here we are, Shattered Dreams. One of the most agonizing problems within our human experience is that few, if any of us, live to see our fondest hopes fulfilled. The hopes of our childhood and the promises of our mature years are unfinished symphonies. Is there any one of us who has not faced the agony of blasted hopes and shattered dreams? Who has not set out towards some momentous goal or some glorious realization only to learn at last that he must settle for much less? We never walk as free men. Circumstances decree that we live within little confining cells. Written across our lives is a fatal flaw, and within history runs an irrational and unpredictable vein. Like Abraham, we too sojourn in the land of promise, but so often we do not become heirs with him of the same promise. Always our reach exceeds our grasp. Many Negro slaves in America, having longed passionately for freedom, died before emancipation. Shattered dreams are a hallmark of our mortal life. Before we determine how to live in a world where our highest hopes are not satisfied, we must ask, what does one do under such circumstances? One possible reaction is to distill all of our frustrations into a core of bitterness and resentment. The person who pursues this path is likely to develop a callous attitude, a cold heart, and a bitter hatred towards God, towards those with whom he lives, and towards himself. Because he cannot corner God or life, he releases his pent-up vindictiveness in hostility towards other people. He may be extremely cruel to his mate and inhuman to his children. Such a reaction poisons the soul and scars the personality, always harming the person who harbors this feeling more than anyone else. Another common reaction by persons experiencing the blighting of hope is to withdraw completely into themselves and to become absolute introverts. No one is permitted to enter into their lives, and they refuse to enter into the lives of others. Such persons give up the struggle of life, lose their zest for living, and attempt to escape by lifting their minds to a transcendent realm of cold indifference. Detachment is the word that best describes them. A third way by which persons respond to disappointments in life is to adopt a fatalistic philosophy, stipulating that whatever happens must happen, and that all events are determined by necessity. Fatalism implies that everything is foreordained and inescapable. People who subscribe to this philosophy succumb to an absolute resignation to that which they consider to be their fate and think of themselves as being little more than helpless orphans cast into the terrifying immensities of space. They never actively seek to change their circumstances, for they believe that all circumstances are controlled by irresistible and foreordained forces. He is, of course, right in his conviction that there is no absolute freedom, and that freedom always operates within the context of predestined structure. Freedom is always within the framework of destiny, but there is freedom. We are both free and destined. What then is the answer? We Negroes have long dreamed of freedom, but still we are confined in our oppressive prison of segregation and discrimination. Must we respond with bitterness and cynicism? Certainly not. For this will destroy and poison our personalities. Must we, by concluding that segregation is within the will of God, resign ourselves to oppression? Of course not. To cooperate passively with an unjust system makes the oppressed as evil as the oppressor. Our most fruitful course is to stand firm with courageous determination, move forward non-violently amid obstacles and setbacks, accept disappointments, and cling to hope. Our determined refusal not to be stopped will eventually open the door to fulfillment. While still in the prison of segregation, we must ask, how may we turn this liability into an asset? To guard ourselves from bitterness, we need the vision to see in this generation's ordeal the opportunity to transfigure both ourselves and American society. Our present suffering and our nonviolent struggle to be free may well offer the Western civilization the kind of spiritual dynamic so desperately needed for survival. Some of us, of course, will die without having received the realization of freedom, but we must continue to sail on our charted course. We must accept finite disappointment, but we must never lose infinite hope. This was the secret of the survival of our slave foreparents. Slavery was a low, dirty, and inhuman business. When the slaves were taken from Africa, they were cut off from their family ties and chained to ships like beasts. Nothing is more tragic than to be divorced from family, language, and roots. In many instances, husbands were separated from wives and children from parents. When women were forced to satisfy the biological urges of white masters, slave husbands were powerless to intervene. Yet, in spite of inexcusable cruelties, our foreparents survived. When a new morning offered only the same long rows of cotton, sweltering heat, and the rawhide whip of the overseer, these brave and courageous men and women dreamed of the brighter day. They had no alternative except to accept the fact of slavery, but they clung tenaciously to the hope of freedom. In a seemingly hopeless situation, they fashioned within their souls a creative optimism that strengthened them. Their bottomless vitality transformed the darkness of frustration into the light of hope. However dismal and catastrophic may be the present circumstance, we know we are not alone, for God dwells within us in life's most confining and oppressive cells. Our capacity to deal creatively with shattered dreams is ultimately determined by our faith in God.